So welcome to the event tonight. We're very happy to have you all. We're going to have a great discussion with some great guests and maybe some more people filing in. But feel free, and those in the back, feel free if you want to filter down, that's fine too. We were joking that it's kind of like a mass. People like to sit sort of near the back, but that's something. So Christians in the Gospels have a clear mandate to promote peace, nonviolence, and reconciliation. We have with us tonight three people who, in scholarship and practice, have worked to bring these ideals to our violent world. I first came into contact with Dr. Andrea Bartoli and the Community of Sant'Egidio when I was working in Rome at the U.S. Embassy at the Vatican. And when I began work there, I had no idea that one of our closest partners for peace and reconciliation efforts, partners of the U.S. Embassy, would be this dynamic organization based in Rome in the shadow of the Vatican that has a presence in over 70 countries now. So we're very lucky to have Dr. Bartoli with us, president of the Sant'Egidio Foundation for Peace and Dialogue. Just last month, he was with Pope Francis in South Sudan, and he will open the program by discussing the work of the community. He will then be joined in discussion with BC's own Professor Sowle Cahill, a preeminent scholar on Catholic peacebuilding and the author of Blessed Are the Peacemakers, Pacifism, Just War, and Peacebuilding. Joining us also is Father Mark Shimave, a BC graduate student in theology from northeast Nigeria, who is also a great scholar in the field and who has had important on-the-ground experience in Catholic peacebuilding. So tonight we hope to learn more about the Community of Sant'Egidio, the wider themes of Catholic peacebuilding, what it is, how it works, and maybe how we can support it in our daily lives as well. So we'll get right to the program. I won't recite the biographies of these speakers. That would go on for quite some time. They're quite august personalities. We do have bio sheets, I think, in the back, and also maybe folks have handed those around. And we also have some C21 magazines in the back. We had a magazine issue just recently about good works by Catholic organizations in the world, around the world today. One of those is the Community of Sant'Egidio, which is profiled in this magazine, and the Catholic Peacebuilding Network. And Professor Cahill has been involved with that as well. So feel free, please, to take a copy of those magazines from the back, and I will welcome Professor Bartoli to the podium. Thank you.
It's delightful for me to be here. I am very happy to be with you and to speak about Sant'Egidio Catholic peacemaking work. It's very clear that the work that Sant'Egidio has done is deeply connected to life as we know it through the gospel. We have an eminent scholar that spoke about Blessed Are the Peacemakers, so I am delighted to have this conversation tonight. But one thing that touched me and Sant'Egidio is that the Greek for making is not tekne, it's not the doing, it's not what we connect to tecnica in Italian, you would say, right? But poie. It's actually connected to creating, to poetry, right? So there is an interesting dimension that comes to us when we start thinking about peacemaking. Because the peace that we are making is actually already there. We are actually simply expressing it the same way we express life, right? Like, we are not creating life in a sense that we are technically, actually we are doing now more and more with science and the way we are dealing with life, right? So there is a practicality of life, there is a concreteness of life that we can definitely, through our biological capacities and, manipulate even dramatically. But I think it's important for me to locate this peacemaking that Sant'Egidio engages with this idea that from a Christian perspective, peace is truly life, and that Jesus on the cross is in peace, is at peace, and is for peace. The paradox of Christian life is that we receive peace in a way that is, first of all, calling us, and doesn't assume us as the doers, but rather assumes us as the followers, as the disciples, as the one that find themselves fulfilled in this vocation, in this way of being, in this becoming that Jesus reveals in a love that is otherwise difficult for us to understand. So I think it's important for us to start from the point, from the Sant'Egidio understanding of peacemaking, that Jesus continues to create peace, even on the cross, even when he's unable to do anything, right? This is a body that is completely stuck. And yet, it's very clear that there are some, in that context, that are able to receive peace in an explicit enough way. One is clearly the good thief that speaks to Jesus and recognizes his own mistakes and asks for forgiveness. The other one is Mary, silently receiving this and giving it to us in the church. And then John, given to Mary as the son and welcoming Mary as the mother, right? So Jesus on the cross is clearly telling us that peace is always present. And that in many ways, what we are doing when we are making peace is to reveal this life that is present to us and to which we are not able to be present because we are taken by ourselves very often by our own doing, right? So it's always possible to be present, and we need to realize that, first of all, peace is co-created, and is co-created through acceptance. That the first step that makes peace relevant is the fact that you and I are present together. You and I are together here. That you and I are present to one another. And that this co-presence allows this co-creation. So, of course, peace should not be contrasted with disagreement. You know, Jesus himself said, away from me, Satan, to Peter and so on. It's not always being always in agreement. But the point is that Jesus invites receiving, seeking, and pursuing peace in a personal and universal way. And so Sant'Egidio is simply a recent expression of something that the Catholic Church has done for millennia. It's not something new, it's not something that is done just by us, but actually what we believe is everybody's calling, especially after Vatican II. It's really part of what the Church should be about in a world that is so fractured, right? The more the world is fractured, the more we are called as Christians to be peacemakers in this co-creation sense. And obviously, this also includes the fact that we need to accept that each conflict has meaning that can be understood. And this is, of course, very obvious for many of us who are familiar with the just war theory and all that. And it's very clear that war is always just, or at least frequently, for those who are fighting it. It's very difficult to fight a war that is not just, a war that you don't feel, like a war that is not right? But the question for those who are trying to bring peace is not to cultivate an attitude of hostility and opposition, but rather encounter understanding. Sant'Egidio stumbled into peacemaking encountering friends who were overwhelmed by violence. Sant'Egidio started in 1968 on February 7, and is now present in 73 countries. I was asked to share that Sant'Egidio is also present at BC. There is a little prayer that meets in Symboli 5:30, so I'm doing a little pitch for the Sant'Egidio little community that is here. But Sant'Egidio is very small for the Catholic, in relation to the Catholic Church as a whole, but has one great advantage, that is the expression of a post-Vatican II church. Sant'Egidio was simply unthinkable before Vatican II. Sant'Egidio is an expression of the church after Vatican II. We have been very ecumenical from the beginning. We have been very deeply involved in interreligious dialogue after the prayer for peace that John Paul II started in Assisi. And we are deeply expression of the Spirit as calling the entire church. So we are delighted to speak about the church in the 21st century in this sense, because we think that John the 23rd, in calling the council, insisted on this fundamental orientation: seek what unites, not what divides. Very simple, right? And yet, if you think about how difficult it is to find what unites, how difficult it is to find the way in which unity can be expressed, how difficult it is to find even the tone. Because very often, when we are right, when we know that we are right, our tone of speaking, our tone of offering is less inviting and welcoming than it could be. There is a certain reaffirmation that comes from knowing the truth and then being convinced on what you're saying, right? So Sant'Egidio is an attempt to bring that tone, this John 23rd tone of seeking what unites and not what divides, in all situations and in all conditions. This started for us with one person, Jaime Gonzalez. Some students heard the story before, but it's beautiful to bring it back because he was a student sent away by the Portuguese because he was too bright and too intelligent from Mozambique. Very black, very African, very Mozambican, but too intelligent for the Portuguese to have when they still had a colonial power there. And he became friends of Sant'Egidio when we were very small in Rome. But then the military Portuguese decided to get rid of the colonies suddenly, and the church could appoint an African, black, Mozambican priest as bishop. And so Jaime became Archbishop of Beira. And very suddenly was put to jail twice. He couldn't celebrate Mass because this was a Marxist-Leninist country that didn't like Catholic, didn't like religious people in general, but especially Catholic because it was too close to the colonial power. So he came back for the visit at Limina and shared with us this condition. And we started working with him, helping him find a way. And through our connections in the Vatican, with the Italian Communist Party and many other conditions, we started working for religious freedom in Mozambique. And that morphed into the peace process that led us to become the peacemakers that we are. So it's a personal story with universal relevance. And we believe that this is Christianity's story. It's a personal story with universal relevance. So it's very important for us to understand better and better what the parties were saying, how the parties were saying, why the parties were saying, and what their goals could be. And this was possible for us because of Jaime, and because he had a space with the community in which he could ask all these questions. So the encounter of somebody that was very local, and at the same time participating in a space that was given to him so that he could think the peace that was otherwise unthinkable for him, became the Sant'Egidio mode. Sunday I'm going to Rome for the new edition of the Rome Initiative for South Sudan, And these kind of processes are regularly used in Rome, where people that desire to think peace find in Rome the space to utter, to express what could otherwise be even dangerous for them. In their own country, it's just difficult to speak about peace because when you are in a situation of war, you need to be on the side of war. You cannot be negotiating. So Sant'Egidio is the expression of a responsible realism. A realism that is not constrained by power-only options, but is really aware that every single person can discover the poetry of the Spirit speaking through her or through him, responding to the specificity of the situation that is in front. So Sant'Egidio is very keen in believing that whatever is going to happen in South Sudan is going to be very different than what happened in Mozambique. Whatever is going to happen in Colombia is going to be very different than what is going to happen in Italy. Because peace, the only peace that really counts, is the peace of the parties, is the peace that the parties can co-create. So we see ourselves as simply helping the parties co-create the peace that is trying to be revealed. We are simply helpers in this effort to make sure that something that is possible becomes probable. Something that is probable becomes real, shared, seen, understood. We do believe that it's important for us and for all working on peacemaking to be judged by the result. And Sant'Egidio is receiving a lot of requests exactly because of Mozambique, because of the many cases in which this co-creation actually occurred. But also because when it didn't occur, when we didn't have the peace coming, the peace emerging, we were faithful enough to continue seeking. The first time John Garang came to Sant'Egidio was in '95. The leader of South Sudan, the leader actually, he wanted to be the leader of the entire Sudan, right? John Garang didn't want to have South Sudan separated. But John Garang came to Sant'Egidio because he heard of what happened in Mozambique. And with whom did he come? He came with the wife, Rebecca, that I met when I went to Juba again, and with a very young Riek Machar, now vice president. So Sant'Egidio is an interesting place because people can come to Sant'Egidio for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, seeking the peace that they could not find. But this is important for the church because the church, we believe, can and should do the same in many cities, in many countries, in many situations, faithfully serving the peace that is always trying to be and not always find a way. Thank you.
Okay, so Father Shimon, oops, I'm sorry. I think I have, here we go, sorry. So I'm again Lisa Cahill from the theology department here, and Father Shimave and I are just going to engage Professor Bartoli in maybe a conversation, ask some further questions for 15 or 20 minutes, and then we'll open it to everyone who would like to get involved in the conversation. So Mark, do you have something that is coming to mind for you?
I'm really impressed by his Bartoli's presentation, and some of the points he raised. Peace being the product of co-creation, which means it's not just merely imposed from the outside, and that you equally brought up the fact that Sant'Egidio had been involved in forms of interreligious dialogue too. And well, more specifically, I would like to hear what your experience has been with regards to Sudan, because you mentioned John Garang, who wanted to be the leader of Sudan as a whole. And we know that the northern part of Sudan is largely Muslim or Islamic, and then the southern part Christian. So that appears to be a case of interreligious dialogue in that sense. So how did you engage these two communities? The Muslim community in Sudan as well as the Christian community. Maybe after the response I may have more questions for you.
Thank you very much. Certainly, I think that Sant'Egidio started the first process in Mozambique, less on this interreligious dimension, but certainly more with the secular, secular religious dimension, right? This is Frelimo was openly Marxist, was openly atheist, openly secular, non-religious, and the fact that Sant'Egidio was very clearly Christian and spiritual was an interesting component to the dialogue. What we didn't expect at all was that subsequent to the peace agreement in Mozambique, Muslim friends from Algeria came to Sant'Egidio fundamentally saying, how happened that you were able to bring peace to Mozambique and you are not concerned about Algeria? Well, Algeria is clearly a very important country, very close to Italy on the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, clearly overwhelmingly an Islamic country where the Christians have been blessed with very important testimonies. Christian de Changer is definitely, he was a friend, Paula, I remember him translating in the prayer for peace, and so the logic there was not interreligious dialogue per se, but rather responding to the request of somebody. And the similar pattern was true in South Sudan. Garang was coming to Rome already in 95 because he was interested in a very daring and difficult political project. He actually wanted to have a democratic Sudan. He wanted to have a Sudan that could give representation to the Islamic presence and the Christian presence through the democratic process. So the way he was discussing it with us at that time was actually using democracy to represent diversity, including religious diversity, including ethnic diversity, including linguistic diversity. And we know that so far, these have been extraordinarily successful in Switzerland. Switzerland is clearly made of people speaking different languages, clearly made by people that cherish their differences even within their internal linguistic traditions, right? And many people do not know maybe, but it's interesting that Switzerland had the longest time of peace, 350 years after the Diet of Stand, because of the testimony of one person, this little Nicolau von Flue, who was a layperson, a monk that left 10 children and a wife close by, and lived a hermit life for years and years and years, living only on the Eucharist, and was so well revealed by the Swiss that when the Diet of Stand failed and the cantons were about to go to war again, rural cantons against the urban cantons, and a delegation went to speak with Nicolau. Nobody knows exactly what Nicolaus said, but the tone of the conversation among the Swiss changed. They signed the agreement instead, and the Confederation was together for 350 years in peace. I'm saying this because peace is not coming out of nothing. Peace comes out of all the relationships that have been built before, comes out of the trust that is given to word that can be shared. And so, in the case of Sudan, unfortunately Garang is clearly dead, and the difficulties in a constitutional path that would give the state its own wording is interrupted. So we'll see if we are able to do it in South Sudan now. We'll see if the new constitutional arrangement can be done. But what I'm trying to convey is that peace can be politically expressed.
Okay, thank you so much. I would like to also know quickly, so has Sant'Egidio been involved? Does Sant'Egidio propose to help out in difficult situation, in crisis situation, or have they been working just based on invitations? Like give the case of John Garang. So do you just go on invitations or you make proposals too?
So we work only on invitation. We are only invited to play a role of peacemakers. But you also need to be aware that Sant'Egidio is attentively present now in more than 70 countries. So we have local people in 70 countries serving the poor, praying every day, and trying to befriend. So there is a large community of thousands of people that are carefully attending societies and communities at large. The peace work is by invitation only because, as I said, the only peace that we believe is really relevant is the peace of the parties. And so we clearly cultivate friendship, we clearly cultivate relationship, we clearly maintain long-term commitments, but the initiative is always the expression of a response to somebody saying, what about this, what about that? I must say that very often it starts with a question. It doesn't start with a project. It never starts with money. And very often it starts really with a wonder of sort, Could it be that? Is it possible that? Could we speak about X and so on and so forth? Or a reaction of a situation. Somebody coming and speaking and saying, oh, this is what happened. And then in conversation, a new options emerges, and then there is a request, what about you doing this and so on?
This might be a more practical question, I'm not really sure. But I'm wondering about the strategies that help people to really see the presence of peace. And in particular, I'm thinking about the interdependence of working with the leadership and working more through the grassroots up. And two other organizations that I've worked with are the Catholic Peacebuilding Network, which emphasizes networks of religious Catholic, but also all kinds of different local groups and how they then connect with mid-level and top level. And also Pax Christi International, which just had a meeting in Rome in December about local peace building efforts. And when you look at a country like South Sudan, it doesn't really have functioning democratic institutions. It has leadership that is locked in adversarial relations. Of course, you would like them to see how peace can come if they recognize it between themselves. Pope Francis keeps expressing skepticism not in South Sudan, but in Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti and his World Meeting of Popular Movements, about the willingness of the elites to really instigate change that is a risk to their own power, and he wants to promote from the bottom up. And my practical question is, are you able to engage, or how would you engage the grassroots, the mid-level, the Catholic Church, not the Pope, but the local Catholic Church, in some sort of advocacy or movement or forming friendships for peace when most of the people are so disempowered?
So, friendship is very important.
Yeah.
So, friendship for Sant'Egidio is a form of prophecy. It's literally the way through the Spirit speaks through us in friendship. So, the first important role that Sant'Egidio tries to play in this local level is to recognize people. Many of these little groups are not recognized enough. So one important work that Pax Christi does and Catholic Peacebuilding Network does, Sant'Egidio is part of Catholic Peacebuilding Network, by the way. So we were among the founding members, so we are definitely familiar with that. But the idea is also to recognize, to acknowledge, right? And to play this role of empowering, strengthening, right? When something happened, it's very important for somebody to say that something happened. When something is there, it's important to be recognized and be better known, well known. I was in Juba when Pope Francis was there with the ecumenical visit, and one thing that was very touching, some of you may have heard of this, but that there was a group of youth that did 9 days of pilgrimages, walking to come to Juba. And this was led by Bishop Carlassare that was a few months ago shot in his leg because there was an internal ecclesiastical issue, right? So instead of giving up, the Pope is coming with a delegation to speak about peace in South Sudan. The people of South Sudan organized a peace pilgrimage. And here I am, coming from New York, in Juba, welcoming this group. It was a beautiful moment, right? And I'm thinking, couldn't we organize peace pilgrimages in Boston? Shouldn't we organize peace pilgrimages in New York? Shouldn't we revisit the tradition of the church that has done pilgrimages for millennia to redo something that is very clearly needed in a way that can speak not just to us, but to many? So the response that Sant'Egidio would say is, one, it's very good that people are doing what they're doing, that this little group are doing what they're doing. And it's important for Sant'Egidio not to replicate these activities that are already done by others, but to play the role of Casa di Risonanza, to making sure that it will be even better heard. And then invite others to consider these peace actions as something that could be replicated and done again.
Yeah, thank you. That's really useful. It helps me see much more the connection between the leadership, the meetings with the higher level leadership that, of course, we see the news reports about, and then what else is going on in the country under the auspices of the Catholic Church, but also in other settings, and how you're managing to bring those together.
One thing that is also important for Sant'Egidio is this Catholic devotion to memory. And it's important for us to remember, this is just sharing with everybody, but that the Community of Sant'Egidio in Rome was making peace with the elite. But in Mozambique was growing among the people. And two people of Sant'Egidio, Laurindo and Madora, were killed by the war during the conflict. So for Sant'Egidio, the work in Rome for peace was not just a generic exercise, was not a project, was not a program. It was my brothers and sisters dying in Mozambique, saved by a peace that can stop this killing. And I think that the church has a beautiful insistence on the fact that communion is personal, that you literally need to know somebody. It's not ideological. I'm very happy that Fred and Sue came, because I know Fred and Sue know me, and we are together, right? So I think it's important for us, as we work for peace, to recognize that when we encounter a situation where somebody that we know is suffering from violence, it's time to intervene, it's time to remember, it's time to be present.
I know that you have a lot of women working in Sant'Egidio, starting with your wife Paula, and also friends and former students that I have as well. My question is, and I know that this is there, I just would like to hear you speak about it. What are you finding, say in South Sudan or anywhere else that you're working, in terms of women's participation and then enabling that, and as you said, recognizing it and empowering it? And what is, I know there's a good deal of gender-based violence in many places, but in South Sudan, for example.
So exactly because there is unfortunately gender-based violence, it's very important to stress not only the role of women as peacemakers, but the experiences of women as peacemakers. To a certain extent, we are clearly blessed or accompanied in this by the fact that the international community is clearly very attentive to these dimensions of gender balance, and in the Rome Initiative we encourage the parties to really give us women participations, and locally, again, I do believe that the role that we can play as Community of Sant'Egidio is recognition, is really making sure that the stories are well known.
Yeah, maybe just a build up to Lisa's question about women, because I know that during his last visit to South Sudan, Pope Francis made particular reference to the role of women throughout, the civil war, how they have been bearers of hope. So I'm just wondering, based on your own experience and your work in South Sudan, can you just highlight some of the activities, some of the things you've seen women doing that has led to this qualification as bearers of hope? Because Pope Francis was very emphatic that he kept saying they have kept hope alive in South Sudan. So if there are instances you have seen and you feel can be of interest here, please.
I definitely think that this keeping hope in the South Sudanese dimension is very crucial, because unfortunately the violence is widespread and almost constant. So there is a significant role that women have played in keeping families together and networks together, but also in co-creating and organizing themselves as beacon of these experimentations. The pilgrimages are definitely the most blatant expression of that creativity. But there is clearly an enormous role that the women play in education, in the family life, and the civic life. There is a question, generally speaking, in South Sudan in terms of the quality of the political engagement that is required for the countries to find the new beginning, the constitutional settings and so on. My hope is that the Rome Initiative will contribute to that, and that the countries will really move in that direction. It's definitely a big challenge, a significant challenge, and we really need to work and pray that it will happen.
Okay. Yeah, now generally we know that in scholarship in peace building tends to talk about the three phases or three processes involved in peace building, where you talk about peacekeeping, where you ensure that people have dropped their arms, and then you go on to peace resolution, and then that's where you draw up terms of agreement, and then the last stage, which is peace, conflict transformation, which is believed to be a lifelong activity. Of course, the three of them are interrelated. I want to emphasize that of the conflict transformation, with the case of Mozambique that you have experienced. So, what have you been doing, to sustain the peace, to really lead to that sense of transformation? Because I've been able to read that you are able to set up the schools of peace and other activities like that. So could you just highlight them, and how impactful do you think they are? Because as it is, unless we get to that level of conflict transformation, we can't really see that peace has been achieved.
So peace is clearly an ongoing responsibility. It's clearly something that cannot be achieved and set aside and say, okay, we are fine, we got peace, let's move on. In Mozambique, there were several things that the Community of Sant'Egidio did to accompany the countries in this level. And one is that the community grew enormously in Mozambique. You have thousands of people that are now actively members of the community, that are serving the poor, that are praying together, and they live in friendship. But there is one particular project that I think is relevant for us to focus on. That is a dream project that started in Mozambique. Because when humanity became aware of HIV/AIDS and the crisis that the virus was creating, there was a significant resistance to spend money and resources in a third world country that was considered marginal. And so high-level quality therapeutic intervention was possible in San Francisco, but not in Mozambique. And Sant'Egidio said, no, it makes no sense. If we know that antiretroviral drugs allows people to live and to transform their lives and not die from AIDS and so on, this is true in San Francisco as it is in Mozambique. And this is how we started, because we started with women in Rome collecting €1 a day to help people get the therapy in Mozambique. So Sant'Egidio became suddenly this new synthesis, not only of the peace that comes politically, but also the peace that comes through good health care, through the fact that you keep people alive, that you transform and transfer scientific knowledge and make it available to people that do not have otherwise access to this. The DREAM project started successfully in Mozambique and now is in more than 10 countries. And it's a beautiful way for us also to invite the West to be less dismissive of the conditions of the south of the world. So the conflict transformation that you referred to is probably expressed better in the Mozambique case by the DREAM project. It's a beautiful legacy, as I said, of a different way of achieving peace through health. But it's working.
Just sort of on the same, sorry, thank you, I'm glad you're sitting here, you can remind me. So this is a little bit similar, and this is again just to hear you express more about what is the situation in South Sudan specifically. So conflict transformation, and there, I've heard many times, of course, that peace is not really sustainable unless the roots of conflict are addressed. And in South Sudan, what are the major roots of conflict? I know there's ethnic conflict between the Dinka and the Nuer, represented by two of the leaders. There's also corruption. There is climate change and drought and floods. Like, how do you really see the situation that people are confronting in South Sudan? And I don't even know if you're at the point yet where you'd be able to envision long-term conflict transformation because you haven't gotten the leaders really to take significant steps. And how do you see those circumstances and what it might involve going forward?
So I see South Sudan as chaotic, as very articulated and very complex. There are many interethnic violence and tension, not just Dinka Nuer. There are many, unfortunately, that are very active. And there is a certain propensity to war. There is a certain over-reliance on violence as something that has to be done and is the way of life, and it is the way it is, and all that. So I think that the tensions in South Sudan are many, and it is important to keep working constructively to improvement that are real. Sant'Egidio at the moment in South Sudan is doing simply one little piece, that is to work with 3 non-signatories to make sure that they will participate into the peace agreement. So it's a very tiny contribution. And of course, we continue to participate in the larger scheme of things, that is this desire and effort to let peace emerge in a fuller way, in a more complete way. But I think it's very important for us to be cognizant of the fact that if I can do one step, I need to do that step. And if I can do this meeting, I need to do that meeting, and then continue to build on what is reasonable and possible in the conditions that are offered to me. So Sant'Egidio is in South Sudan very clearly doing the Rome Initiative, is focusing on these 3 non-signatories, and is continuing these conversations, and in that sense contributing to a whole that we hope may emerge. But again, South Sudan is also a place of extreme diversity that has been interactive for millennia. And I think it's important for us not to underestimate the capacity for peace that is within that system, and to really engage with everyone in such a way that those potentials are actually expressed.
Thank you. I think it's just about time for us to engage with everyone, as you just said, and ask for people who are here, who have perspectives or questions, something you'd like to add into the mix. We would love to hear from you, and there's a microphone, I think, going around. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Hi, thank you for coming to speak with us today. I was wondering, how often do actors or people come ask Sant'Egidio for help, since you mentioned that people voluntarily come to you guys, you don't go and impose yourself on others. So is it at least like a country a year that comes to ask, or do you kind of put yourself out there and say, like, we're here to help in general? So I was just wondering how often people come to you.
So I would say that there are significant steps. First of all, I would say that you need to imagine that we are actively following a certain number of situations. So it's not that processes are just out of the blue. So within those processes, you may have steps, initiatives, occasions that are emergent. And I would say once a month, once every 2 months, there is a major initiative that occasionally it can be published. If you go to the Sant'Egidio website, sometimes you see major things announced and so on. As I said, in the case of South Sudan, President Sowle Cahill announced the re-engagement of the government on the Rome Initiative publicly when the Pope was there. So everybody heard it, it was very clear to everybody, but it's not always so prominent and not always so clear.
Thank you. Emmanuel. I'm just in my fourth semester at STL. I'm coming from Rwanda. That's a country that knew that history of genocide. I thank you for sharing. I've heard that you have a broad experience in Africa, exactly Mozambique, South Sudan. I would like to just say something about how to feel when we are lacking peace. So this is
But we are
when we are in a violent situation. How do you feel from inside? How peace is very valuable when you have lost it. So it means that things that you lose tend to be valuable than things that you have. So I would like to say that we thank God here that we are in peace context, but just to share is something to share is that we tend to evaluate the splendor of peace when we have lost it. I'm speaking out of experience. So I have one or two questions. First one is just similar to that. Do you have a proactive mission on the leadership of all countries that are experiencing this kind of violence, conflict? Because as my reflection goes back to my own country, everything exactly lies on the leadership, not on the grassroots communities. Grassroots communities, yes, they can work miracles, but the leadership plays a major role in this conflict resolution, conflict transformation, peace keeping. Does Sant'Egidio have this kind of proactivity so that it can go in countries, say, we need to work with you because you are the one with the key. You are a leader of this nation that is torn apart or that have violence. So it's a proactive mission that I would like to ask. Because we are in a...
And my answer is no. The answer is no, we don't. Because if you are an authoritarian ruler and somebody comes to you and says, I come to you because you need peace, you are depriving your people of peace, well, the ruler most probably will receive that as an insult, as a provocation. So it's better not to say it and just wait in the quiet time of Sant'Egidio where we pray and we pray and we pray for the ruler to come to her senses, his senses, and so on.
Yeah, the second question was about the specificity of the Catholic peace building. What is the specificity of this Catholic peace building? I understand that it's informed by the Evangelical, let's say, Council, but does it differ from other peace building? Is there more than one peace building so that they also Catholic or other confessional peace building? And how does, let's say, the leadership of the church bishops in the country with conflict really on this kind of peace building that's Catholic? Or they are not aware even that there is this kind of project that will inform their communities?
So Sant'Egidio is a Catholic public lay association of the church. So we are Catholic because we are Catholic. We are recognized as Catholic and so on. So our peace making, and honestly Sant'Egidio much prefer, speaking in terminology, I understand that it is an expert, but Galton expressed many, many years ago, this distinction between prevention, peacemaking, peacekeeping, peacebuilding. The peacebuilding being this part in which the whole society participates. Peacemaking is when the military is used to keep the parties, that used to be in conflict together, and then peacemaking when the parties engage in this effort to find peace, and prevention is when you're trying to avoid the peace to be broken, right? Sant'Egidio really positioned itself in the peacemaking moment, because we believe that the Catholic Church has very specific gift. One is this very global network. The Catholic Church is present everywhere and has very long roots. The Catholic Church, I was speaking this afternoon, reminding everybody that all the popes that were called great were peacemakers. Leo, Gregory, what did they do? They went to these barbarians that were coming, and they were not just, naive. They had a project in mind. They had a civilization project in mind to say that non-violence is actually better. It's better not to be violent. It's better to govern your own people without using violence. So the church historically has been on the peacemaking side, not just with Francis as a pope or Francis as a saint, but also with the popes many times. So there is a Catholic specificity, we believe. Of course, peacemaking is for everybody. It's not that only the Catholic need to do peacemaking, but because we are Catholic, we do believe that there is a specific Catholic questions around peacemaking after Vatican II. And in that sense, we do believe that it's particularly important to be aware of the ecumenical dimension, the interreligious dimension, this humanity in the making dimension that is emerging. But we do believe that as Catholic, we have a role to play as Catholic. It's very important for us to remember who we are. Yeah? It's important to pray, it's important to serve, it's important to befriend, and it's important also to be aware of our intellectual contribution to humanity as a whole. Right? We do believe that humanity doesn't come together just by chance. You don't form a state by chance. I was mentioning Switzerland before. Switzerland is very non-Catholic, or not only Catholic. Very interesting. How happened that we were able in the middle of Europe to get these Protestant Catholic countries that stayed together for a long time? Well, probably because there was something spiritual working in the leadership, but also in the grassroots, in the people. And we do need to go back to the idea that history is made by all of us. History is made by our own deciding in front of what we are seeing. And this is a big responsibility. This is why I do believe that there is an important Catholic dimension that is to invite many to believe that peace is actually vocational. That it is important for us to work for peace the same way we work with the poor, the same way we pray, the same way we practice devotions.
Thank you. Well, in that case, I'll hand leadership here over to the.
Okay, my name is Lynn Bardelli. I'm the Associate Director for the Church in the 21st Century Center. So I wanted to very much thank you for being with us tonight, because it helps us do two things. One is celebrate the Faith in Action publication of the C21 Resources magazine. Peter Martin was the guest editor for this magazine, and also this year we are celebrating the 20th anniversary of the C21 Center, and a very special issue just came out in the past few weeks. So please take those, they're up at the top of the stairs waiting for you. But we need to also thank not just the Church in the 21st Century Center sponsored this event, but also the Minor in Catholic Studies, the Office of Global Engagement, and then also the Global Practice Program of the School of Social Work. So thank you very much to them. Thank you to Peter for pulling us together tonight, for bringing our panelists together. And of course, we need to thank the three of you, because this has been a wonderful conversation. I couldn't think of a better trio to be together to talk about Catholic peace building. So thank you very much for the three of you for being here and for this conversation.